Before you hear the end of the story, you have to understand the beginning. You have to understand what it felt like to be the daughter of a ghost. My father, Richard, wasn't just a person, he was a concept my family had to overcome. He was the brilliant but failed inventor, a cautionary tale whispered at holiday dinners. He was the man who left behind a dusty workshop filled with strange contraptions, a mountain of debt, and the faint, lingering smell of ozone and disappointment. My mother, Eleanor, loved him, I think, but she loved the idea of success more. After he died, his memory became a stain she was constantly trying to scrub out. She'd sigh, running a hand over her perfectly coiffed hair, and say things like, "Your father aimed for the stars, Tessa, but he forgot we had to live on Earth." It was her polite way of calling him a fool. My brother Marcus was younger. He just absorbed her narrative. To him, Dad was a black and white photo on the mantelpiece, a symbol of a life they were lucky to have escaped. Then came Vincent, Vincent Sterling. He was everything my father wasn't, polished, charming, and celebrated. When I met him, he wasn't just a man, he was an answer to a question my family had been asking for years. When would we finally have a winner? He was the toast of the tech world, a wunderkind whose revolutionary new battery design was going to change everything from phones to electric cars. He was on magazine covers. He gave talks that were more like rock concerts, and he loved me. Or at least he performed a version of love that was so convincing, I didn't dare question it. My family was ecstatic. Eleanor treated him less like a future son-in-law, and more like a deity who had descended to grace our lineage. "He sees your potential, Tessa," she'd tell me, her eyes shining. "He's lifting you up." The implication was clear. I, the daughter of the failure, needed lifting. Marrying Vincent wasn't just a personal joy, it was a dynastic victory. We were finally shrugging off the shadow of Richard and stepping into the sun. I believed it. I drank it in. I loved the way my mother would puff up with pride when she introduced us. I loved the way the pity in my relatives' eyes was replaced with envy. I was no longer just Tessa, the quiet librarian, the daughter of that poor, misguided dreamer. I was Tessa, fiancée of Vincent Sterling, the man who was building the future. It felt warm. It felt safe. It felt like winning. The lie began to unravel on a Tuesday. It was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, gray and drizzly. Vincent was in a rush, heading to a final meeting with his intellectual property lawyers, before filing the patent that would make him a billionaire. The patent application was a massive document, a stack of papers nearly a foot high, sitting on our imported Italian marble dining table. "Sweetheart," he said, kissing my forehead, his lips cool, "could you be an angel and just collate these for me? Section 3 needs to go after Section 7, and the appendix schematics need to be organized by date. It's just grunt work, but you're so much better at details than I am." He was always saying things like that, little compliments that were actually dismissals. I was good at details. He was the big picture guy, I was the support staff for his genius. For 2 years I had accepted that role. I was proud of it, so I smiled and said of course I would. I made a fresh pot of coffee, put on some soft music, and sat down at the table, ready to be the perfect, supportive fiancé. The main application was dense with legal jargon, but the appendices were where the science was. They were filled with schematics, data tables, and chemical formulas. Vincent had binders full of them. I started sorting through a pile labeled historical drafts and ideation. He'd told me it was the graveyard of his old failed ideas, a testament to how far he'd come. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't a sudden lightning bolt, it was a slow creeping chill that started in my fingertips and slithered its way up my spine. The printouts were old, the paper slightly yellowed, printed from a dot matrix printer. The font was familiar, a blocky utilitarian typeface my dad had always used. My breath hitched. I picked up one of the schematics. It was a diagram of a polymer matrix, and in the bottom right corner, in my father's spidery, precise handwriting, was a note: "Cathode degradation still an issue. Try cobalt shielding." My heart started to pound, a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs. It couldn't be. It was a coincidence. My dad wasn't the only person in the world to work on battery technology. But then I saw another page, and another. The annotations, the specific way he drew his arrows, the shorthand he used for chemical compounds. It was all his. It was like seeing his ghost at my dining room table. I felt a wave of dizziness. My mind was screaming. No, no, no. Vincent was a good man. He loved me. He was just building on similar concepts. That had to be it. But my hands were shaking as I flipped to the last page of the stack. It was a file directory list, printed out to keep track of the project files. At the top of the page was the root directory, Richard Franklin Labs. My dad's full name was Richard Franklin Hayes, and beneath it, a project folder name that made the air leave my lungs in a painful rush. Project Project Phoenix, that was his name for it, his magnum opus, the project he believed would be his legacy, the project he was working on, frantically, in the months before the heart attack took him. He'd told me about it, his eyes wild with excitement. It's resurrection, Tessa. A battery that can draw a tiny charge from ambient heat, from the air itself. It can't die. It just rises from the ashes again and again, like a phoenix. My vision tunneled. The lavish apartment, the diamond on my finger, the whole glittering life I thought I was building. It all felt like a cheap stage set. I stumbled away from the table, my legs unsteady. In my home office, in a large plastic storage bin under my desk, was a box I had saved from the workshop cleanup. It was labeled Dad's Sentimental Junk. My mother had wanted to throw it all away, but I couldn't bear to. It was full of his favorite pens, a chipped coffee mug, and a dusty case of old 3.5-inch floppy disks. My hands were numb as I dug through the box. There it was, a black floppy disk with a handwritten label in his familiar scrawl, Phonics_final_archive. I had an old laptop with a USB floppy drive I'd bought years ago to digitize some family photos. I hadn't used it in ages. I plugged it in, my heart hammering against my ribs. The drive whirred to life, a sound from a forgotten era. I inserted the disk. A window popped up on my screen. A single folder, project_phonics. I clicked on it. Inside were dozens of files. Schematics, research notes, a project journal. I opened one of the schematic files, a .tate file, and there it was. The exact same diagram I was holding in my hand from Vincent's patent application. I checked the file properties. Date created October 17th, 7 years ago. 3 years before I even met Vincent. 2 years before my father died. The proof was absolute. It was cold. It was digital. It was undeniable. Vincent hadn't invented anything. He hadn't innovated. He hadn't had a single spark of genius. He was a ghoul, a grave robber. He had stolen my father's soul, polished it up, and was preparing to sell it to the world as his own. And I, the daughter of the man he'd robbed, had been his smiling, adoring accomplice. The success my family was so desperate to claim wasn't Vincent's, it was my father's, the father they had dismissed as a failure. The irony was so bitter, so profound, it felt like I was choking on it. The sound of the key in the front door made me jump. Vincent was home, and I was sitting in a room with a ghost, a thief, and a truth that was about to burn my entire world to the ground. I slammed the laptop shut, the click echoing in the silent apartment. My body was thrumming with a toxic cocktail of adrenaline and horror. I could hear him in the hall, humming, dropping his keys into the ceramic bowl on the console table. The sound, once so comforting and domestic, now sounded like a threat. "Tessa?" "Everything sorted," he called out, his voice smooth as silk. I couldn't answer. My throat was tight, my tongue a dry, useless thing in my mouth. I shoved the floppy disk back into its case, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. I hid it deep inside the storage bin, underneath old photo albums and dusty trinkets. I walked out of the office on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. He was standing by the dining table, looking at the neatly stacked papers. He smiled, a brilliant, camera-ready smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're amazing. See? Perfect. My little organizer." He wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. I went rigid. His touch felt like a violation, his breath on my neck like a spider's kiss. I had to force myself not to flinch, not to scream. "The lawyers were thrilled," he murmured, his voice vibrating through my bones. "They said it's the most airtight patent they've ever seen." We're going to be so, so rich, baby. Everything you've ever wanted. Everything I ever wanted. The words hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. What I had wanted was love. What I had wanted was to make my family proud. What I had wanted was to escape the shadow of my father's perceived failure. And this man, this stranger holding me, had promised me all of it, all while desecrating the one true brilliant thing my father had ever created. I pulled away gently, feigning a headache. I'm just a bit tired, Vince. It was a lot of paper. He looked at me, a flicker of something, annoyance, suspicion, in his eyes before it was replaced with practiced concern. Of course, you rest. I'll order in that Thai place you like. We should celebrate. This is the beginning of everything. I spent that night in a state of suspended animation. I picked at my pad thai, feigned sleep in our cavernous bed, and listened to the steady, even rhythm of his breathing, the breathing of a man without a conscience. My mind, however, was a maelstrom. It kept replaying moments from our past, but now they were cast in a new, sinister light. Every casual question, every seemingly innocent gesture, was now evidence of his long, calculated deception. The first flashback hit me like a physical blow. I was a child, maybe 10 years old, sitting on a high stool in my father's workshop. The air smelled of solder and dust and potential. My dad, Richard, was pointing at a tangle of wires and glass beakers on his workbench. His face was smudged with grease, but his eyes were blazing with a light I hadn't seen in them for years. "See this, Tess," he'd said, his voice low and conspiratorial, as if he were sharing the secret of the universe. "Everyone thinks batteries are about storage. They're wrong. They're about conversion. What if you didn't need to plug it into a wall? What if it could just breathe? Breathe in the waste heat that's all around us, in the air, and turn it into power." He held up a small, dark gray ceramic wafer. "This is the lung, this is the heart, this is the phoenix. It will change the world." I hadn't understood the science, but I understood the passion. I understood that I was looking at a man who truly believed he held a piece of magic in his hands. He wasn't a failure in that moment. He was a king in his own dusty, cluttered kingdom. The second memory was colder, sharper. It was a week after his funeral. My mother Eleanor stood in the doorway of that same workshop, her arms crossed, her face a mask of weary resignation. "We have to clear all this out, Tessa," she'd said, not unkindly, but with a finality that brooked no argument. "It's a fire hazard, and frankly, it's a monument to bad decisions. Your father poured every last penny we had into these hobbies." "It wasn't a hobby, Mom," I had whispered. "It was his life's work." She sighed, that same long-suffering sigh I knew so well. "And what did it get him? What did it get us? Debt, stress, a reputation as the neighborhood eccentric. We need to be practical now. We need to move on." We spent the next weekend boxing up a genius's dreams and labeling them junk for donation. It was my mother who had handed me the case of floppy disks. "I doubt anyone even has a machine that can read these anymore," she'd said, with a dismissive wave. "But you keep them if you want." A little memento of his efforts. The third memory was the most damning. It was one of my first dates with Vincent. We were at a cozy little wine bar, and he was leaning forward, his eyes locked on mine, making me feel like I was the only person in the world. He had asked about my family. I told him about my dad, the inventor. I expected the usual polite, slightly pitying nod. Instead, Vincent's face lit up with what I mistook for genuine fascination. "A failed inventor?" he'd scoffed. "There's no such thing, only pioneers who ran out of time or money." "He sounds incredible, Tessa, a true visionary." What was he working on? I was so flattered, so desperate to have someone see my father, not as a failure, but as a visionary, that I opened up completely. I told him everything. I told him about the workshop, the strange contraptions, and the big idea, Project Phoenix, a battery that could recharge itself. A few months later, when he was helping me with a final clear-out of my parents' old house before my mother sold it, we were in the garage. That same box of sentimental junk was there. Vincent picked it up. "What's all this?" he'd asked, peering inside. I explained it was the last of my dad's workshop things. He pulled out the case of floppy disks, a curious smile on his face. "Wow, talk about a time capsule. Mind if I take a look at these?" I'm a bit of a retro tech geek. I've got an old drive at my office that can read them. It'd be fascinating to see what a real homebrew inventor was up to. I remember feeling a swell of gratitude. He was taking an interest, he cared. Of course, I'd said, beaming. Be my guest. He took the box. He took my father's life's work, my father's soul, right out from under my nose, and I had handed it to him with a smile. The memory was so vivid, so sickening, I had to physically get out of bed. I went to the living room and stood in the dark, looking out at the glittering city lights. Vincent hadn't just stumbled upon my father's work. He had targeted it. He had targeted me. He had seen my family's shame and my own deep-seated need for validation, and he had used it as a key to unlock a dead man's vault. The final catalyst came not as a memory, but as a small green bubble on my phone screen. It was just after 3 a.m. A text from my mother. I opened it, my thumb trembling. It was a photo of her and Vincent from a charity gala last month, both of them beaming at the camera. The text read, "Just can't sleep. I'm so excited, thinking about the announcement party. We should use the same caterer we used for the engagement. Everything has to be perfect. So proud of you both. Finally, a real success in the family. Love you, a real success in the family." The words sliced through the fog of my grief and shock, and in their place, something else began to crystallize. It was cold and hard and sharp. It was rage, a pure, undiluted rage that I had never felt in my entire life. My mother wasn't just clueless. She was a willing participant in the erasure of her own husband. She had traded his legacy for a better caterer and bragging rights at her country club. My family didn't value genius, or passion, or love. They valued the appearance of success. They worshipped at the altar of the bottom line. Vincent hadn't just fooled me. He had perfectly mirrored my family's shallowest values back at them, and they loved him for it. I stood there in the dark, the city lights blurring through the tears in my eyes. But they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of fury. The warmth I had felt being with Vincent, the safety, the pride, it had all been a lie, a comfortable, beautiful lie, and the truth was ugly and sharp and painful. But it was real, and it was mine. I looked at the reflection of my own face in the dark glass of the window. I saw the daughter of a failed inventor, and for the first time, it didn't feel like an insult. It felt like a mission. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about justice. It was about giving a name back to the ghost my family had tried so hard to forget. But as I stood there, watching the first hints of dawn break over the city, a quiet, dangerous thought took root in my mind. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. The decision was made. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to dismantle Vincent Sterling's life with the same quiet precision he had used to steal my father's. The next morning, I woke up with a terrifying clarity. My grief and rage had cooled overnight, hardening into something far more dangerous, a plan. I couldn't just walk up to Vincent and accuse him. Who would believe me? He was Vincent Sterling, the tech messiah, with a billion-dollar valuation and a PR team that could spin gold out of straw. I was Tessa Hayes, the librarian, the quiet fiancée. In the court of public opinion, I was a hysterical, jealous woman, and he was the wronged genius. My own family, my mother especially, would be his star defense witnesses. They would paint me as ungrateful, unstable, trying to sabotage the best thing that had ever happened to us. No, a direct confrontation was a loser's game. I needed proof. I needed allies. I needed to build a case so irrefutable that by the time I made my move, his entire empire would crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. My first thought was of the name on the schematics, RF_LABs. My dad hadn't worked completely alone. There was someone else, another name I hadn't heard in over a decade. Arthur Vance. He was my dad's partner in the early days, another brilliant physicist who shared his vision. They had a falling out, something bitter and vague that my mother had always blamed on my father's inability to be a team player. I remembered him as a quiet, intense man with kind eyes who always smelled faintly of chalk dust. If anyone on earth could corroborate my story, it was him. Finding him was easier than I expected. The internet has a long memory. Dr. Arthur Vance was a tenured but semi-retired physics professor at Northwood Community College, a small, unassuming school about an hour's drive from the city. He had no major publications in recent years, no corporate affiliations. He had, for all intents and purposes, fallen off the map, just like my dad. I found his faculty email address and stared at the blank message window for a long time. What could I possibly say? I settled on something simple, something that only he would understand. Subject: Project Phoenix. The body of the email was just one sentence. My name is Tessa Hayes, Richard's daughter. I need to speak with you. It's urgent. I hit send and felt a jolt, as if I had just lit a fuse. He replied in less than an hour. My office. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Come alone. The next day, I told Vincent I was going to visit an old college friend who was having a hard time. He barely looked up from his tablet, murmuring, "That's nice of you, sweetheart," already lost in his world of stock options and press releases. The lie came easily. I was discovering a talent for deception I never knew I possessed. Northwood Community College was a world away from Vincent's sleek, glass and steel corporate headquarters. It was made of brick and faded linoleum, with the quiet, scholarly air of a place forgotten by time. Arthur's office was at the end of a long, dim hallway, cluttered with books, papers, and old, dusty-looking scientific instruments. He was older than I remembered, thinner, with a web of weary lines around his eyes. He looked at me with a guarded, almost hostile expression. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice raspy. He didn't invite me to sit. "I have about 5 minutes before my next class. What is this about?" "It's about my father," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "It's about his work." A bitter laugh escaped him. His work is dust. It's a footnote in a corporate legal file somewhere. What do you want? Money? An apology? I have neither to give you." I reached into my bag and pulled out the floppy disk in its plastic case. I set it on his desk, right next to a teetering pile of graded papers. Phoenix _final_archive. He stared at it. His whole demeanor shifted. The hostility vanished, replaced by a profound, heart-wrenching sadness. He reached out a trembling hand and traced the faded label with his fingertip. "My God," he whispered. "I thought these were all destroyed." "My fiancé is about to file a patent," I said, my voice flat and emotionless, "for a revolutionary new battery, one that recharges from ambient heat. He calls it the perpetual cell, but the schematics, they're from this disk." Arthur looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw the kind eyes I remembered from my childhood. They were filled with a dawning horror. "Who is your fiancé?" "Vincent Sterling." Arthur sank into his worn leather chair, as if his legs had given out. "Sterling," he repeated, the name tasting like poison in his mouth. Of course it would be him." He looked at me, his eyes sharp with a new, terrifying understanding. "Tessa, your father and I, we didn't just have a falling out. We were destroyed. We were hunting for venture capital for Project Phoenix. We pitched it to a dozen firms. One of them, a boutique investment house, called Vexor Capital, seemed incredibly interested. They had us sign a mountain of NDAs, and then demanded to see all our research, all our data, as a sign of good faith." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "The lead analyst on our case, the one who took us to dinner, and called us geniuses, the one who promised us the world, was a young, hungry, ruthlessly ambitious kid. His name was Vincent Sterling. He was an intern, but he ran the show. A week after we submitted everything, Vexor Capital passed on the deal. They said the technology was unfeasible. 2 months later, they filed a lawsuit, claiming we had stolen their pre-existing research. It was a lie, a corporate raiding tactic. They buried us in legal fees we couldn't afford. The stress of it, it's what put your father in the hospital the first time. I was broke, Richard was broken. He died before we could even get to discovery. The case was dismissed, and I gave up. I walked away from it all." The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. Vincent hadn't just found the discs by chance. He knew what they were. He had tried to steal the project legally first. When that failed and my father died, he must have thought the research was lost forever. And then, years later, the daughter of the man he had ruined walked right into his life, holding the keys to the kingdom. He hadn't just stumbled upon an opportunity. He had finished a heist he started a decade ago. He doesn't just have the schematics, I said, my voice gaining strength. He has a working prototype. He's showcasing it to investors in 2 weeks. Arthur's eyes narrowed. He's a software guy, a finance shark. He's not a material scientist. He can follow the recipe, but he doesn't understand the chemistry. Did your father ever tell you about the watermark? I shook my head. We were paranoid, Arthur explained, a faint, proud smile touching his lips. We knew our work was valuable. In the final version of the polymer matrix, we embedded a unique, inert isotope of bismuth in a specific crystalline structure. It serves no function. It doesn't affect the battery's performance in any way. It's a signature, our signature. It's completely undetectable unless you run a deep-level spectrographic analysis, and you have to know exactly what frequency to look for. Vincent wouldn't know to look for it, and he wouldn't know to remove it. If you can get me a sample of his prototype, we can prove, on a molecular level, that it's your father's work. There it was. The hidden leverage, the silver bullet. It wasn't just my word against his. It was science. It was irrefutable. A new, cold resolve settled over me. He's having a private pre-launch event for investors at his R&D facility next week, I said, the plan already forming in my mind. He's been bragging about the security, but I'm his fiancé. I have access. It's risky, Tessa. So was what he did to my father, I retorted. So was what he did to you. Arthur studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Your father would be proud of you. Not for the revenge, but for the fight. He was a fighter. He stood up and walked over to a dusty whiteboard covered in complex equations. He erased a small corner. When you get the prototype, he said, drawing a small, intricate diagram, it has to be from the final validation batch. They'll be marked with a UV tag. It will look like this, and you can't just take it. You have to swap it with a convincing dud. A dud that will fail, but not so catastrophically that it looks like sabotage. It just has to look like a standard manufacturing defect. We spent the next 2 hours planning. Arthur, the forgotten academic, came to life before my eyes. The weariness was replaced by the focused intensity of the scientist he once was. We planned the swap, the diversion, the specifications for the dud battery he would build for me in his college lab. This was no longer just my fight. It was ours. We were resurrecting Project Phoenix, not for profit but for truth. As I drove back to the city, back to the lavish apartment and the man who was living a lie, I didn't feel like Tessa, the heartbroken fiancé, anymore. I felt like a soldier going behind enemy lines. The mission was clear: secure the asset, confirm the evidence, and then choose the battlefield for the final confrontation. And I knew exactly where that battlefield would be. The week leading up to the investor event was a masterclass in psychological warfare, with me as the sole silent combatant. I played the part of the doting, slightly overwhelmed fiancé to perfection. I asked Vincent about the event, my voice filled with manufactured awe. It all sounds so huge, Vince. I feel so disconnected from it all. I wish there was something I could do to help, to feel like I'm a part of our success. His ego, vast and fragile, was the perfect tool to leverage. He preened. Of course, sweetheart. I want you to feel involved. The event planners are handling the big stuff, but they're struggling with the on-site coordination at the lab. You're so good with people and details. Why don't you be my official liaison? You can have an all-access pass. Just make sure the catering is flawless and the investor gift bags are in the right place. It would be a huge help. It was almost too easy. He handed me my own Trojan horse. Sterling Innovations R&D was a gleaming sterile facility in a suburban tech park. It was all white walls, frosted glass, and employees who scurried around with an air of terrified reverence for their great leader. I spent 2 days there, a clipboard in my hand and a beatific smile on my face, charming the event staff and mapping out every corridor, security camera, and access point. I was a ghost in their machine, completely invisible. On the day of the swap, I had the dud battery Arthur had built for me concealed in the false bottom of a catering supply box. It looked identical to the real thing, right down to the casing and serial number stickers Arthur had painstakingly forged. It was a perfect piece of mimicry, designed to fail in a very specific mundane way, a slow, steady power drain that would be flagged by their diagnostic software. My heart was a trip hammer in my chest as I walked through the main lab. I was supposed to be checking on the placement of floral arrangements. Arthur's voice was a tinny whisper in a discreet earpiece, guiding me. The validation lab is a clean room, Tessa. You can't just walk in. The prototypes for tomorrow's demo are on a charging rack just outside the main door, undergoing their final 24-hour cycle test. I saw the rack, a sleek stainless steel cart holding 20 identical dark gray batteries, each one glowing with a soft blue indicator light. A lead engineer, a stern-looking woman I knew was Dr. Evelyn Chen, was monitoring a nearby console. This was the choke point. I need a diversion, I whispered into the tiny mic hidden in my collar. Chen isn't leaving that station. Create a sensory problem. Arthur's voice crackled. Not a security threat. Something that requires human intervention but doesn't trigger a full alarm. My eyes darted around. I saw a coffee station set up for the lab techs, an industrial-sized coffee maker, a carafe of hot water for tea, and a stack of styrofoam cups. My plan, which had been so meticulous, now felt clumsy. I had to improvise. I walked over to the coffee station, acting like I was checking supplies. With my back to Chen, I picked up the hot water carafe. My hand slipped. A cascade of steaming water splashed down onto the floor, near a conduit of power cables, leading to a secondary server rack. It wasn't enough to cause a short, but it looked dramatic. Oh my gosh, I yelped, my voice filled with convincing panic. I am so sorry. A junior lab tech rushed over. Ma'am, please be careful. Chen looked up, her face a mask of irritation. She barked at the tech. Get a mop, you idiot, and check those connections. I don't want a power flicker ruining a month's worth of data. That was my window. As Chen and the tech were distracted by the spill, I walked briskly over to the charging rack. My hands were shaking, but my movements were sure. I located the specific slot Arthur had described, the one marked with the almost invisible UV tag he'd shown me. With a fluid motion I had practiced 100 times in my apartment with a block of wood, I disconnected the real battery, slid it into a hidden pocket in my blazer, and slipped the dud into its place. I reconnected the charging cable. The dud's blue light flickered on, perfectly matching the others. The entire exchange took less than 3 seconds. I walked away, my heart screaming, and forced myself to get involved in the cleanup. Apologizing profusely, Chen shot me a look of pure contempt. Please, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Just stick to the canapes, Miss Hayes. Let the scientists handle the science. Of course, I said, my voice meek. I'm so sorry for the trouble. I backed away and left the lab, the weight of the real battery in my pocket, feeling like a block of lead. I had it. I had the smoking gun. The next day, just hours before the investor event was set to begin, I got a frantic call from Vincent. His voice was a low, furious growl. Something's wrong. One of the demo cells is failing diagnostics. It's draining power. Chen is freaking out. She says it must be a contaminated polymer batch. I feigned ignorance and concern. Oh no, Vince. Is it serious? Will it affect the presentation? No, he snapped. We have 19 others. We'll just use another one. But it's embarrassing. It makes us look sloppy. Chen is trying to run a trace, but it's probably just a one-off defect. Still, I'm going to have her head for this. Incompetence on a day like today is unacceptable. He was panicking, his perfect facade was cracking, and his first instinct was to blame someone else, a subordinate. It was more confirmation of the man he truly was. Meanwhile, I was already on my way back to Northwood, the real battery nestled safely in its box. I handed it to Arthur. He took it into his lab without a word. I waited in his office, the silence stretching for what felt like an eternity. An hour later, he emerged. He wasn't smiling, his face was pale, and his hands were trembling, but his eyes were burning with a fire I hadn't seen before. It's here, he said, his voice thick with emotion. The Phoenix signature, your dad's molecular watermark. It's perfect, unchanged. He just copied it, Tessa. He copied it down to the last atom. He held up a printout from his spectrometer. It was a graph with a single sharp spike at a specific frequency, a spike that meant nothing to the world, but everything to us. This is it. Arthur said, his voice breaking. This is the truth. The final piece of the plan was now in motion. I had already been in contact with a journalist, a woman named Alana Finch, from a well-respected tech investigation site. I had fed her anonymous tips for weeks, rumors of internal strife at Sterling Innovations, whispers of corners being cut in R&D. Now I sent her a final, encrypted email. It contained a single attachment, the spectrographic analysis. The subject line was simple: Sterling Innovations Investor Event, 7 p.m., ask about Project Phoenix. The trap was set, the bait was taken. All that was left was for the wolf to walk into it. The days leading up to the grand announcement were a strange, surreal limbo. My life was bifurcated. Half of it was spent in the cold, clear world of strategy with Arthur, analyzing data and preparing our final move. The other half was spent in the suffocatingly lavish world of Vincent and my family, a world of floral arrangements, guest lists, and champagne flutes. The dissonance was jarring. I felt like an undercover agent whose cover was about to be blown. The family pressure, orchestrated by my mother, became relentless. Eleanor seemed to believe that the success of Vincent's patent was somehow cosmically linked to the speed of our wedding planning. She would call me 3-4 times a day, her voice a chipper, insistent drill. "Tessa darling, I spoke with the caterers for the announcement party," she said in one such call. "They have an opening for a wedding reception the following month at the same venue. Isn't that perfect? A double celebration of success. We can announce your wedding date at the party. The press will love it." "Mom, I think we should wait," I said, keeping my voice level. "It's Vincent's night. We shouldn't overshadow it." A cold silence on the other end of the line. "Overshadow it? Tessa, you're not overshadowing it. You're completing it. You and Vincent are a team, a power couple. This is what we've all been waiting for." Your father, bless his heart, he never understood the importance of presentation. Vincent does. You need to show a united front. Her casual dismissal of my father, using his memory as a tool to manipulate me, sent a fresh wave of icy resolve through my veins. This wasn't just about Vincent anymore. It was about her. It was about the entire rotten value system she had built our family upon. My brother Marcus was her unwitting lieutenant. He cornered me one evening when I stopped by my mother's house to pick up some old mail. He looked genuinely worried, his brow furrowed. "Tess, what's going on? Mom's in a tizzy. You're being weird. You're distant." Vincent called me, asked if I knew what was up. "He's a good guy, you know. He's offering me a job in his new marketing department. He's helping our family. Don't mess this up." I looked at my brother, at his earnest, pleading face. He wasn't malicious like my mother was blind. He was just weak, swept along by the current of Eleanor's ambition and Vincent's charisma. I saw an opening, not to win him over, but to plant a seed of doubt. "Marcus," I said, my voice quiet, "what do you actually remember about Dad's workshop?" He looked taken aback. "What? I don't know. It was a mess, full of junk." "Why? Do you remember what he was working on? The project he called Phoenix?" He shifted uncomfortably, vaguely. "Something about a battery?" "Mom said it was just another one of his pipe dreams that was never going to work." "Why are you bringing this up now?" "That's ancient history." "Because history has a funny way of repeating itself," I said, leaving the words to hang in the air. I could see the confusion in his eyes. It was enough. I wasn't trying to recruit him. I was just loosening the foundation of his certainty. The final confrontation with Vincent came the night before the party. He came home late, his face tight with stress. He'd clearly had a bad day, probably dealing with the fallout from the defective battery. He tossed his briefcase on the floor and loosened his tie, his movements sharp and angry. He found me in the living room, reading a book. "We need to talk," he said, his voice devoid of its usual charm. I put my book down. "Okay, don't okay me," he snapped. "What the hell is your problem, Tessa? You're a million miles away. Your mother is calling me every 5 minutes, convinced you're getting cold feet. My investors are flying in from around the world. I'm on the verge of the biggest triumph of my life. And my own fiancée is acting like she's at a funeral. What is it? Is this about the wedding? Is it too much pressure?" I just looked at him, my expression calm, neutral. My silence was a wall he couldn't find a foothold on, and it infuriated him. His tone shifted. He sat down next to me, forcing a softer expression onto his face. It was the love-bombing phase. "Hey," he said, taking my hand. It was like holding a cold stone. "Listen, I know it's been a lot. This whole thing blew up so fast, but this is for us. Everything I am doing is for us. So we can have that house in the country, so you never have to work again, so your family is taken care of. I'm building a legacy for us." When I didn't respond, his patience frayed again. The mask slipped, and the guilt tripping began. "You know, a little support would be nice. I'm out there every day, slaying dragons, and I come home to this ice queen. After everything I've done for you, for your family, I took you on. I gave your family's name, the name of a well. I gave it respectability." He had almost said it, the name of a failure. He had stopped himself, but the word hung in the air, shimmering and ugly. That was the moment the last, lingering shred of doubt I had about my plan evaporated. He felt nothing but contempt for my father, for my history. I was a prop. My family's story was a stepping stone he had used to climb to his stolen throne. I pulled my hand away. "I'm just tired, Vince," I said, my voice chillingly calm. "It's a big week. I'll be fine tomorrow night. I'll be right there in the front row, smiling." He stared at me, searching my face for the woman he thought he knew. He couldn't find her. He stood up, shaking his head in frustration. "Fine, whatever. Just pull it together for tomorrow, Tessa, please, for me." "Oh, I will," I said to his retreating back. "Tomorrow night is going to be unforgettable." He didn't hear the promise in my voice. He didn't understand that the power had already shifted. He was walking into his own coronation, completely unaware that I was the one who had already built the guillotine. The venue was obscene. It was a renovated historic bank, all soaring marble columns and vaulted ceilings, dripping with crystal chandeliers. Hundreds of people milled about, a sea of expensive suits and cocktail dresses, the air buzzing with the electric thrill of money about to be made. My mother, Eleanor, was in her element, flitting from group to group like a monarch butterfly, her voice a tinkling symphony of name-dropping and proud pronouncements. She was wearing a sequin dress that cost more than my first car, a visual representation of the success she had craved for so long. She kissed the air beside my cheek. "Darling, you look simple, but elegant." Vincent is about to go on. "Isn't this incredible? All of this, because of him. We're finally on the right side of history." "I suppose it depends on who's writing it," I said, my voice quiet. She didn't hear me, already turning to greet a senator. I took my seat in the front row, right next to an empty chair I had reserved for Arthur. My brother Marcus sat on my other side, fidgeting with his tie. He leaned over. "You okay, Tess? You look pale." "I've never been better," I said. And the strange thing was, I meant it. A profound calm had settled over me. The fear was gone, replaced by the serene certainty of a bomb maker who has checked the wiring one last time. Arthur arrived just as the lights dimmed. He slipped into the seat beside me, looking unassuming in a worn tweed jacket. He gave my hand a brief, firm squeeze. In the crowd, I spotted Alana Finch, the journalist, standing near the back with a cameraman, her expression sharp and expectant. All the pieces were in place. The stage lights came up, illuminating Vincent. He stood at a sleek, minimalist lectern, basking in the applause. He looked radiant, confident, a god in a bespoke suit. He held up his hands for silence, and the room fell quiet. "Thank you," he began, his voice resonating through the cavernous space. "Thank you all for being here. They say innovation isn't a single event, but a journey, a long, difficult road of trial and error. But true innovation is more than that. It's a legacy. It's about building on the past to create a better future." The irony was so thick I could have gagged on it. He smiled his million-dollar smile, and behind him, the enormous screen lit up with the Sterling Innovations logo. "Tonight we unveil that future, a technology that will redefine our relationship with power. I call it the perpetual cell." He paused for dramatic effect, and in that pause, as he was about to say the word legacy again, I pressed the small button on the device in my pocket. The screen behind him flickered. the Sterling Innovations logo vanished. In its place, a grainy, high-resolution photograph bloomed into life. It was a picture of my father, Richard Hayes, standing in his workshop. He was smiling, holding up the small dark gray ceramic wafer I remembered so vividly. He looked young, hopeful, and brilliant. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Vincent froze, his smile faltering. He stared at the screen, his mind clearly struggling to process what was happening. Then, the image split. On the right, one of Vincent's polished computer-generated schematics for the perpetual cell. On the left, a scanned image of one of my father's original hand-annotated diagrams from the floppy disk. They were identical. Below my father's diagram, the File Properties box was visible, showing the creation date from 7 years prior. Vincent went white as a sheet. His eyes darted around the room, looking for a stage manager, for someone to blame. He found my eyes in the front row. I just looked at him, my expression unreadable. From the back of the room, Alana Finch's voice cut through the stunned silence. "Mr. Sterling, Alana Finch, Tech Investigates. Can you comment on accusations that the perpetual cell is actually a technology developed by the late Richard Hayes under the name Project Phoenix?" Before Vincent could stammer out a response, Arthur stood up. "I can," he said, his voice surprisingly strong and clear. "My name is Dr. Arthur Vance. I was Richard Hayes's partner. Project Phoenix was our creation." The screen changed again, now displaying the spectrographic analysis of the battery I had stolen. A single damning spike on a graph. "What you see here," Arthur continued, his voice resonating with decades of suppressed conviction, "is a molecular watermark, a unique isotopic signature that Richard and I embedded in our polymer matrix, a signature that has been found, through independent lab analysis, in every single prototype of the perpetual cell." The room erupted into chaos. Investors were on their feet, shouting. Cameras were flashing. Vincent stood on the stage, a statue of a man, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. This was my cue. I stood up and walked calmly toward the stage. A security guard moved to intercept me, but I just held up my all-access pass. He hesitated, confused, and I walked past him. I took a microphone from the stand. The room quieted slightly as I turned to face the crowd. "My name is Tessa Hayes," I said, my voice steady. "Richard Hayes was my father. For most of my life, I was told he was a failure, a dreamer whose dreams came to nothing. Tonight, I learned that isn't true. He wasn't a failure, he was a victim of theft." I turned to look at Vincent. The mask was gone. In its place was pure, unadulterated panic. "He didn't just steal a design," I said, my voice ringing with clarity. "He stole a man's legacy. He exploited a family's grief. He built an empire on a dead man's dream." I played the final card. A recording filled the room, a conversation from just a few nights ago, captured by the tiny microphone I had worn. Vincent's voice, full of condescending arrogance. "Your father was just a tinkerer who got lucky but didn't know what to do with it. It takes a real visionary to turn an idea into an empire." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a total, undeniable annihilation. Security was now moving toward Vincent, not to protect him, but to escort him away. My mother rushed towards me as I stepped off the stage. Her face was a twisted mask of fury and horror. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "How could you do this to us? You've ruined everything. You've ruined us." I looked at my mother, at the woman who had spent my entire life chasing a reflection in a shop window, and I felt nothing but a profound, empty pity. "No, Mom," I said, my voice soft but firm. "He ruined himself, and you were so desperate to be associated with a success that you never bothered to realize you were already related to one. You just buried him under your own ambition." I turned away from her stunned face, from my brother's look of dawning, horrified understanding, and walked toward Arthur. He put a steadying arm around my shoulder. I didn't look back. The charade was over. My father's ghost was finally at peace, and for the first time in my life, so was I. It's been a year since that night. The fallout was as spectacular as the explosion itself. Vincent Sterling became a cautionary tale overnight, a byword for fraud and hubris. He's currently facing a litany of lawsuits from his investors, the SEC, and a federal investigation for patent fraud. His company Sterling Innovations was carved up and sold for parts. His name, once a synonym for genius, is now permanently attached to disgrace. He tried to fight it, of course. He hired a team of ruthless lawyers and a crisis PR firm. They tried to paint me as a scorned woman, a vindictive gold digger, but the evidence was too absolute. The science didn't lie. Arthur's testimony, combined with the digital time-stamped proof from my father's floppy disk, was irrefutable. The molecular watermark became the nail in his coffin, a poetic piece of justice my father would have appreciated. My life, on the other hand, became quiet. The noise and glitter of Vincent's world vanished, and in its place was a stillness I hadn't realized I was craving. With Arthur's guidance and the legal help of a pro bono firm that took on our case, we successfully reclaimed the patent for Project Phoenix. We filed it under its proper name, in its proper inventor's name, Richard Franklin Hayes. We didn't go corporate. We didn't chase billions. Instead, we established the Phoenix Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to ethical technology licensing and funding young, overlooked inventors, the kind of brilliant, passionate people like my father, who have great ideas but no resources. Our headquarters isn't a glass tower, it's a refurbished warehouse in an industrial park, not far from where my dad's old workshop used to be. It smells of solder and dust and potential, and every time I walk in, I feel like I'm home. The technology is slowly making its way into the world, not with a bang, but with purpose. It's being used in medical devices for remote clinics, in emergency power supplies for disaster relief. It's a legacy of help, not hype. I never spoke to my mother again after that night. I heard through the grapevine that she sold her house and moved to a smaller condo in a different state. She couldn't handle the social fallout, the shame of being connected not to a failure but to a fraud. She had hitched her wagon to a shooting star, and when it plummeted to earth, she was caught in the wreckage. I can't find it in me to feel sorry for her. My brother Marcus is a different story. About 6 months ago, I received a long handwritten letter from him. He had quit the job Vincent offered him before it even began. He wrote that for weeks after the party, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what I'd said, about Dad's workshop. He went back to our old house, which was still on the market, and spent a whole day in the dusty garage, looking through the few things that were left. He apologized, not just for siding with Mom and Vincent, but for his own willful ignorance, for never taking the time to know his own father. He's taking some engineering classes at a local college now. He said he wants to understand. We've had coffee a few times. It's awkward and tentative, but it's a start. It's a bridge being built over a canyon of neglect. And me, I'm happy. It's not a loud, celebratory happiness. It's a deep, quiet contentment. I found a part of myself I never knew existed, a fighter. I learned that my father's legacy wasn't failure. It was resilience. I'm telling you this story because for years, I let other people's definitions of success and failure write my narrative. I thought marrying Vincent, a man my family approved of, a man the world celebrated, would finally validate me. I thought it would make them proud, and that their pride would make me whole. But pride built on a lie is just a prettier form of shame, and a life lived for someone else's approval is a cage, no matter how gilded the bars are. It wasn't about the money or the fame in the end. It wasn't even just about revenge, though I'll admit, there was a certain satisfaction in watching Vincent's world crumble under the weight of his own lies. It was about taking back a name, my father's name, from a man who stole it, and from a family that never understood its worth in the first place. Some people might say I went too far, that I should have handled it privately, that I destroyed lives with my public takedown. And maybe they're right, but I think about my father, alone in his workshop, pouring his heart and soul into something he believed in, only to have it stolen and his memory tarnished. I think about Arthur, his career derailed, his passion extinguished for decades, and I think that some legacies are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. My father's was one of them. He was a pioneer who just ran out of time. I just made sure his work finally found its own. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have walked away, or would you have burned it all down to get to the truth? Let me know what you think in the comments below. It's a complicated question, and I don't think there are any easy answers, and if you've ever felt like your own dreams were dismissed or your own worth was overlooked, make sure you subscribe and become a part of this community, because here, we believe every legacy, no matter how quiet, deserves to be honored. We see you.